And I'm going to drop the agenda in the chat one more time for everybody who's joined. So nice to see everyone. Hope you enjoyed the weekend as much as I did, because I cannot believe how beautiful the weather is finally. We do not have our contract in place yet for facilitation services, but I just got off the phone with our business manager and have been assured they will be in place for our in-person council meeting next Monday. So hopeful for that. So I will do my best to facilitate today. The agenda is in the chat. We have two main things to get through today. One of which is finalizing the agenda for next Monday's meeting and the associated documents to support that meeting. And the second is really a question for all of you around process with new counselors and new counselors engaging in ongoing work. And so wanted to provide a few minutes to introduce a new counselor and let them ask a question that they've been asking me that feels more appropriate, directed at all of you. So first and foremost, Secretary Clauser, I'm happy to turn it over to you today to just kick us off and address the minutes, which I can drop directly in the chat if that would be helpful.
Sure, thanks, Jane. And thanks for going over the agenda as well. That's great.
I'm going to put the minutes right there in the chat. If there's any questions about them, happy to give you a minute, but otherwise they're straightforward from our last meeting, I think. Okay, hearing no objections, we'll consider those approved and move on to the first part of the agenda for today, which is approval of the final agenda for next week's meeting and the associated materials. So if I can again see the computer, see where I hit to share the green and agenda. Here it is.
So Jane, are you going to put those? Okay, you're pulling them up on the screen. I was just going to say, I think it might be easier to pull them up, but you beat me to it. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I thought I would share the agenda. These are all provided on the website and link for today. Marion, if you'd like, we can drop them in the chat so the public has direct access to them. But I'm pulling up a Word document so that if there's any comments or edits that any of you would like to see, I can note them as I go. But wanted to walk you through the changes to the agenda first since we last met, and then the associated documents. So you'll recall at our last meeting of the steering committee, we worked in detail on the agenda for the meeting next week. We, just to step back, reflected on the need to come together and the timing of that meeting, questioning whether or not it made sense to do that in the middle of the legislative session or to wait after, and really reflected on the fact that this meeting will largely be about process and a chance to sort of come together, get to know each other, and step back from the substantive work of the council. And as such, it felt like good timing as any to do that. So there were concerns at the last meeting to build out the agenda with more time associated with sort of setting the stage for the different components we wanted to build into the agenda for the day. Hopefully you saw that as of Friday last week, as I was posting these documents and getting ready for today with all of you, I extended the meeting a half an hour for next Monday, made it from 9:30 to 2 instead of 10 to 2. And that was a request that you all made based on sort of digestion of what we were trying to do when we looked at the agenda last time. And I worked to put together a refined objectives and meeting agendas with staff here, thinking about time needed to really get through everything. So first and foremost, wanted to pause and reflect on the objectives of the meeting, which I took a shot at substantively reworking since we last got together. Wanted to draw out the fact that the just transitions reflection is really going to be a space for us to reflect on how equity and justice can be better integrated into our work of the council. And as we get down to that part of the agenda item, hopefully you'll see some details about some outcomes that could come of that conversation, But this is really taking us back to the conversation that we started at the January council meeting and giving us a time to really process the letter that many of you had not seen before the January meeting. So hopefully, as we send out the materials for the council meeting next week, I'll resend the letter from Rejoice to everyone. We'll be able to take some time to reflect on that separately, individually, in groups, and then come together to think about how that informs the work going forward. The second objective of the meeting is to identify core components of the council strategy with an eye towards the update to the climate action plan, which will be due just 2 short years from this coming July, and thinking about the core components to drive that work. So really reflecting on the tasks at hand to sort of what work still needs to go into updating any refinements that we need to make to this initial climate action plan, and then an eye towards the future plan and really thinking about what the groundwork is to set the stage for having us be better prepared, a process, all of that to update that plan. In doing so, we'll want to clarify the roles of the council, the subcommittees, state staff, and really identify and discuss capacity constraints across the board, knowing that it's not only state staff capacity, but also capacity of counselors and subcommittees, and understanding what a heavy lift that first plan was. So really trying to set expectations for the next plan. And then identify the work needed ahead of us to update any process or governance documents, knowing that the process roadmap as one key document was really set up with as a catalyst for the initial sort of undertaking of setting up the council, and what are the tools and processes that we need to identify for the long-term stability of the council now. And then, of course, understanding that you guys have never come together as a group, really want to take advantage of the council's first ever in-person meeting and provide a chance to really strengthen relationships and welcome new counselors. So I'll pause there and just make sure that those feel now like the right objectives for the meeting, and know that in preparing and sort of trying to level set, which was one of the asks Secretary Moore and many of you, I think, also had shared a concern, was really trying to sort of level set around capacity, level set around what tasks look like in documents. We did develop a one-pager to accompany these objectives that is linked here in the agenda further down, but try to sort of take a step back from number 2 and test some hypotheses. And so as we go through this today, we'll really want to look at that and make sure we're in agreement on what those hypotheses are, but because that was our thinking and not all of your thinking. It's trying to reflect the thinking I've heard from all of you, but needs your input today. Any questions on the objectives, or do those feel like the right ones for the day? Going to take that as a resounding, we're good to go. So looking further down at the agenda, again, we'll start earlier. I hope that makes sense. I know that in building capacity for facilitation, the facilitator we anticipate will be under contract, had to build travel and thought. So we decided to shift the meeting half an hour earlier in the day rather than go later in the day. So we'll start at 9:30. We'll start with the just transitions reflection. This is largely the same from what we talked about last time. I think we were all in agreement that this was work that the council needed to lean into before building a strategy for the coming year and beyond. Think about our reflections and work based on that letter, and then any further response that the council would like to take based on the request laid out in the letter from Joyce. We'll work through an opening discussion with the whole council, reviewing first and foremost those 3 outcomes of the meeting that I just went through with all of you, and then encouraging folks to bring forward any questions or challenges to the supporting one-pager document. which, assuming we are able to walk away with the final approval of you all today on the agenda and documents, I can send out to everybody today so they have a week to review ahead of the meeting. And then we'll jump in. We'll jump into working in small groups first to sort of sketch out and use the worksheet that we've also provided to you, which we'll look at today. We'll take a step back at first and really start with those core elements of what will feel successful and workable for all of you. Ask some questions around encouraging conversations that sort of break down the barriers between tasks, roles, capacity, and process, and really trying to cross-fertilize those 4 components. There was some issue last time to really, with all of you, to highlight capacity before we dove into the strategy. But we really felt like all 4 of these are so integrated that you need to know what the tasks are to understand what the capacity needs are. You need to know what capacity constraints are to understand how to drive tasks. And then think about the critical roles of the steering committee and other components of the council to drive forward a revised process document. So hopefully through thoughtful facilitation, we'll be able to really go back and forth through the 4 components and the document, which we'll take a closer look at in a minute. We'll try to break down refining strategy, come back into plenary, and really think about the basic timeline and a work plan for the council over the next 2 years leading up to 2025. And try to outline and sketch out the work that you all will do in individual groups as a group. Have a conversation, break for lunch. I haven't, just as an aside, haven't heard if we'll provide lunch or not yet. But when I send out the documents this afternoon, we'll provide any guidance on needs for food and accompaniments for the meeting, and let folks know if they should plan to bring a lunch or if we'll provide one. There'll be CBI will join us and provide an overarching discussion about their approach to public engagement and how we envision it working in their new contract with us, and the additional capacity that's being brought on through that contract to support direct community engagement, and the broader intent that we're trying to reach beyond just working with CBI, having local Vermonters as part of that contract. I think that will be really grounding in what I understand from all of you is a critical component of setting us up for success with the next climate action plan. And so hopefully you all will see the connections to the earlier conversation and be able to inform the work ahead of us. We'll take public comment. And the only, I'll just say, sort of heartburn component on timeline still for me in the agenda is, oh, actually, look, I built the agenda from 9:30 to 2:30. All right, scrap what I just said. Actually, I have the meeting built from 9:30 to 2:30. So hopefully that will work for everybody. But I think I sent it out from 9:30 to 2. So I'll have to look at that. Sorry for that oversight on my part. The final reflections and with an eye towards planning for the next council meeting. One of the things I heard from you all at the last meeting of the steering committee was an appreciation that we want to clearly signal that the council will come back together shortly after this meeting to deliberate on the biomass recommendations. So I want to make sure that while we're wrapping up and thinking about the needs for the upcoming year, we're also have an eye to the short-term needs of the biomass recommendations that have been drafted and needed to come up to the steering committee sooner rather, the council sooner rather than later. So just articulating that clearly for an April meeting of the council, and then using that meeting to start to revisit what the strategy looks like and the tools going forward. So I'll pause there. Besides the mistake on the timing on the agenda, anything else that feels not right yet or concerns more broadly about the approach to the meeting? And then before, after we pause here, I'll go and show you the other 2 documents quickly. Liz, please.
Yeah, it's not a concern so much as I just want to make sure that the way I'm thinking about it is right and clarify something the steering committee is not doing, which is you had mentioned, I like the one pager makes sense in terms of organizing people's thoughts. But I would not expect that the, what are they called? I can't remember if you called them straw proposal or,
Yeah,
you know, the hypothesis. Thank you. I wouldn't expect the council to have the impression that the steering committee somehow either drafted those or even signed off on them. In other words, it feels very appropriate to me for climate office staff to have come up with those and for all of us to react to them rather than bringing those as hypotheses that have some sort of steering committee stamp of approval on them. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. And I guess I asked you three as steering committee members if that, I think that's fair because I think it's a lot of you all to agree to each individual hypotheses right now. Without a lot of time and thought. And so if it feels appropriate to say that this is carrying forward from state staff and the facilitator in a hope of driving forward conversation and outcomes for the day, then I think that's fine. It's a tool to help.
That's great.
Yeah.
It feels more in keeping with the way we're presenting and hoping for this meeting to go, because if it comes almost with the kind of top down, like the steering committee that we already know we need to redefine its scope and how it operates and is selected and everything else, I hate for the first meeting with those sorts of sort of test hypotheses to come as if the group of us had some authority to do it. So I appreciate that clarification.
And I appreciate that clarification too, and that makes a lot of sense. Any other comments on the agenda for now? I see your hand, Cheryl Joy, and we'll have comment at the end, so thank you. And I'll remember to come back to you. Secretary Clauser.
Thanks, Jane. So I just want to, will you add that to the beginning of the one pager, or is that just something you'll discuss? I think an additional sentence would be helpful in the one pager.
That sounds great.
Okay.
I can clarify at the top of it, language that says to support conversation, the facilitators and state staff have proposed the following for discussion.
Great.
Perfect. I'm gonna I'm going to turn your attention to the worksheet first. Are you all seeing the worksheet?
Yes.
Okay, great. It means I can keep it on my small screen for me so I can actually read it. So this was, the idea was to be able to break into smaller groups and be able to have some guiding questions that take us through the components that are listed in the outcomes for the day. It's fairly simple. It allows some open discussion at the top and then drives the conversation to not only on one or the other in the buckets, but really tries to get at the core needs that we as a group and others have come up across the council and subcommittees over the last year, really need for further clarification to inform work planning, and then obviously the tools needed to get there. So this is a fairly straightforward document. I don't expect there to be any concerns, but just wanted to highlight that this is the tool and the deliverable that we'll have folks work with in small groups and then come back in plenary to facilitate a conversation around. Secretary Clauser.
I have no concerns about the document itself. I just had some logistical questions about the small groups. I know the last time the steering committee was together, we had some concerns about our ability to do that with potentially a hybrid meeting situation and where those breakout groups would go. I just want to confirm we have that figured out before we build in the small groups to the agenda.
That's a great point that, in all honesty, I haven't followed up on with legal counsel on. So we have a in-person meeting with an in-person location and the small rooms, but having the hybrid component makes it, yes. I'll have to follow up with general counsel about public meeting and understand and make sure that works. I think that when you have the in-person meeting option, it might be possible, but I'll have to confirm. And if not, I can work with the facilitator to make sure that we can just do this in plenary from the onset.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. I know that we likely have one counselor participating remotely, but everyone else has signaled they'll be in person. Any other questions or concerns about this? I trust that if we need to do it in plenary, that we'll be able to do that with the facilitator. So I don't anticipate it being a problem, but hope that we can have the benefit of having smaller conversations. And one more piece for the day is the one pager. Okay, thank you. Technology. So again, recognizing that it didn't make sense to break down capacity without talking about tasks and vice versa, we thought it would make sense to put forward this one pager to test hypotheses, or I like the language Liz used, straw poll test, some questions that we've been starting to hear as key themes across the council. Knowing that there are, background documents that support this as well, like with capacity, there's the memo that A&R provided this fall. There's been ongoing concerns from counselors that the process that we used to stand up the first climate action plan was not sustainable for them personally. So trying to think about systems in place and put forward the questions that we've heard throughout over the last year as with an eye towards future iterations of the plan here in this one document to set us up for the conversations that we hope counselors will have both individually in small groups and then in plenary. So understanding that this document now will be a document that comes as a facilitation tool provided in support from state staff. Happy to hear any concerns or input now that you have, but also appreciate that we'll have that opening sentence, and we don't really need to have you sign off on the actual content of the language within it, unless you have any explicit concern or improvement that you'd like to see. Happy to read, happy to read through the sections if you haven't had a chance, the hypotheses, or just leave it as a tool that we'll use, whatever your preference is. I think they're pretty in line. I'm rereading them as I go, not wanting to read them out loud with all of you, but they're pretty in line with a consistent conversation that many of us have had. So hopefully you all feel that way too. Liz.
Minor, but if you could just maybe hyperlink the process roadmap, or somehow, if people are going to prep ahead of time, that's in your, I think, last hypothesis, if I remember correctly. And I think that would be helpful for people to look at. Similarly, I don't know if it's necessary for a hyperlink here or if some sort of prior meeting agenda link could be added in, but it feels pretty large to have this conversation yield consensus on whether the current plan amendments will be limited to biomass and transportation work already done, biomass upcoming in April. So it may or may not yield kind of a final consensus on that, I don't know, but it feels hard to get there without some sort of link for those materials, especially for new counselors. So even though it's a one pager, and I think that's great, you may want to provide easier background material for folks.
Yeah, and under the capacity, in that same vein, under the capacity section, we can link to the A&R memo as well.
Right, yes, that's the other one. That's right. Yep. There's probably a couple other ones, the just transitions principles. Basically, when I read through it, I thought, oh, this is a lot to kind of distill. So maybe if there's some ways to get folks to have easy access to prep material, probably through hyperlinks, just by going through the whole thing as you finalize it.
That's great. Like under the roles, we have a link. We have a graphic that shows council steering committee, subcommittees, task groups. We can do that. Yeah, I'm happy. We're making note to put as many links in as possible, and we will note that when we send it out, that the hyperlinks were there for ease of access to supporting documents.
Excuse me, I didn't hear that last part, Jane. Will you be adding the hyperlinks or no?
Yep, I will do that.
Good.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm hearing no objections. I will work to improve upon this document, add the additional sentence up top, as many hyperlinks as we see fit, and make sure that those are noted when we share this document with counselors ahead of the meeting, so that they can go as deep into the sort of background information as they would like to come prepared to the meeting to have a thoughtful conversation about the 4 different components. And as always, this will be linked in the agenda along with the worksheet, which folks can have access to ahead of the meeting. And everything in line, this will all go out this afternoon, so counselors will have a full week with all of the materials to prepare. Any other comments for now on documents for the council meeting, or any other additional considerations for the upcoming council meeting that should be thought about ahead of time? Hearing none, I'll move on to the next part of the agenda, which is around the biomass recommendations. I know that Chase Whiting is here as well, and I will happily provide an update on the biomass task group and work, and invite Chase, if he's interested, to provide any further detail on the process around the equity scoring rubrics application. I want to provide that update and the component around where we're at with those recommendations before I turn it over to our new counselor, David Dean, who represents rural communities on the council, to make a request or an ask that he had directed at me, that I have just sort of a process-based question on, and really thought in service of his work as a counselor, thought it would be best suited for the steering committee to consider his request, and really where it fits in the sort of process of adopting or moving towards deliberating on the biomass recommendations in service of eventually adopting them as an addendum to the climate action plan. So as you all know, the biomass task group finished up their work as a task group largely at the end of last year, in service of working towards the December council meeting and having draft recommendations for the council to look at and deliberate on and to work on as adopting as an addendum to the climate action plan. When the meeting didn't happen in December because of the lapse in appointments from the House, we canceled that meeting, and the biomass recommendations have been sitting in waiting for the new appointments to be made to the council in order to have a full representation of the different sectors to adequately review those recommendations. our hope and anticipation is that the council now will meet in April and deliberate on those recommendations, assuming you as a council just determine that appropriate when you meet next week. We only have one vacant seat on the council remaining. I'll just say for all of you, David was appointed to represent rural communities, and Paula Melton was appointed on Friday to represent municipalities. She's from Brattleboro. So we have one vacant seat of a fuel dealer seat that has still not been appointed by the speaker, but we're hopeful that that they're working in service to make that appointment in a timely manner. So the biomass task group has been largely dormant, not meeting in sort of waiting for the council to take action on their recommendations. However, the Just Transition Subcommittee, of which Chase Whiting is now a co-chair of and served as the liaison to the biomass task group, has been working to put forward a memo to the council on the role of the Just Transition Subcommittee broadly in an ongoing fashion for the council, and what the role of the Just Transitions Committee will be, what they would like to recommend that it will be in service of applying the guiding principles and the equity scoring rubric long-term and in supporting a community engagement. They've been working on a memo that will come to the council this spring that will have a recommendation for how council and subcommittees will use the guiding principles and the equity scoring rubric with support from the Just Transition Subcommittee. And in service of that memo, and as a test run of sort of like going beyond a liaison approach, the biomass task group took a shot at applying the equity scoring rubric to the recommendations and came to the Just Transition Subcommittee's last meeting to have a conversation around the recommendations and their the ranking of the equity scoring rubric and further considerations of the equity scoring rubric and conversations in that space. That conversation didn't finish, and Chase, in his role, will be making a recommendation to the biomass task group and how to wrap that up in service of meeting the April deadline for the biomass task group to have a completed equity scoring rubric to bring forward to the council when they deliberate on the recommendations as a complementary document to support the council's deliberation of those scoring rubrics. So that is in service and in work, but beyond that application of the equity scoring rubric, there's no intention of revising or reviewing the recommendations before the council deliberates on them. And so with that, I'll pause and see if there's any questions on sort of where we're at with the biomass work and the task group's role. And Chase is welcome to jump in and clarify anything on process with the equity scoring rubric. And then once we sort of wrap up the update conversation, I'll turn it over to Councillor Dean to ask a question around his interest and considerations around the recommendations for the biomass recommendation. Hearing no questions or updates, David, I encourage you to sort of bring forward your concern or interest, and feel free to let the steering committee react to a process. Let me pause and let Chase.
Sorry, Jane. I didn't mean to jump in. I was just pausing to see if there were any questions before I said anything. I didn't mean to mess up the flow there. I'll just very briefly speak to the equity rubric assessment and just note that a very preliminary first draft was written. It was shared with the subcommittee, the Just Transition Subcommittee, and with the biomass task group members. It was not intended, and it is not intended to be a final draft, and it is intended to be informed by members of the biomass task group, of the Just Transition Subcommittee, and of the public through public process and participation in comments. And so it really was just to get the ball rolling. And unfortunately, I was unable to be at that subcommittee meeting because I had some emergency travel that came up, and I tried to join when my service was very, very spotty. And so to the extent I wasn't able to frame up what that particular document is in this process as a preliminary first draft that is still waiting for the appropriate input, just wanted to make known that that's what it is. Looking forward to working with the various members of the subcommittee and the task group and the public who would want to engage on that. And I'm happy to answer any more specific questions about the equity rubric if anybody has any, but at the very least, just wanted to make that aspect of the process known.
Thanks, Chase. Those were important details around the application of that tool. Thank you for their filling in. David, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just about to ask, should I? I am new to the Climate Council, representing rural interests on behalf of the Speaker of the House. And the first document I run into is the biomass paper draft. And I had some very deep concerns. One, in terms of the document itself, it's backwards. It starts with conclusions and then proceeds to spend 2.5 pages justifying those conclusions, not with specific instances of fact, but with studies that need to be done to justify or at least somehow underwrite the conclusions that were reached. So what I had done is I've taken the time to rewrite that document. And I haven't changed. There's some English editing. I hate passive sentences and edited them out and changed some structure, but I didn't change the intent, I don't believe, of any of the words written in the original document. I reorganized it in a way that says, we want to answer these questions. And those questions were in the document initially. All I did was put them at the top and then proceed to reorganize the document. And I think it's important for a couple of reasons that the Climate Council overall, through the process, and however documents and statements and positions do go out to the public, to have the biomass subcommittee consider, not necessarily word for word, the document that I have prepared, but at least consider the reorganization of the work that went into the initial report. And I make the suggestion because I'm not sure, and I've gone back through the meetings, the biomass meetings. I've read the minutes. I've looked at the reports that were delivered. I may not have gotten all of them. It's very difficult up on the website because it's so dense. But I believe I got all of them. And there are a couple of things missing, and I did not add them to the paper as I rewrote it, as I have just described. There's a couple of things about wood that I think are important to keep in mind when you compare them to fossil fuels. Regrowth does reduce carbon input, and no fossil fuel does that. Wood dollars stay in the local economy. You can't buy wood from China to fuel a plant in Burlington. logging practices, back when I was in the legislature, McNeil came online, Reigate came online. We were very concerned about the impact that these plants might have on intensive logging in specific areas, and put in place, with the help from Forest Parks Recreation, the logging industry, loggers, a sustainable forestry requirement to provide wood to these plants, and they're both using them. So none of those points have been mentioned in the report to date, and none, and as I said, I didn't edit them in. McNeil and Reigate have an exaggerated effect on the wood products industry, the whole industry, because they absorb excess product and waste wood, and they absorb excess labor. And if you lose that sponge, all of a sudden you have an economic system that is boom and bust, as opposed to some kind of rational economic stability for the people who are in the industry.
So David,
I have two more points, and then I'll
but I just want to remind you that this is not the body that will deliberate on the content of the recommendations. This is the steering committee's job, is really to help support.
right. And as I shared with you, and all right, I'll jump past. What I would ask is that the full committee reconsider the biomass report and send it back to the biomass subcommittee for additional hearings, because there's some stuff that did not make it into the record, particularly a study from the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, nor a memo from the health department that I can see. Both that are, I think, important documents and important bits of information for this consideration. Now, can that be done between now and April? As Jim, I don't know. It would be talk about a heavy lift for an all volunteer operation. It would be a very heavy lift. What can be done between now and April is for a review of the rewrite of the paper. I'm more than happy to just turn it over to the committee and participate in that conversation. But so that the product that comes out of the Climate Council is rhetorically defensible. And I'm not sure that the report as it exists now is. I'll stop.
So my understanding is there's two process questions here. There's the process of the task group making a choice to continue to work in good faith to apply the equity scoring rubric between now and April. That request will come from the Just Transitions Committee specifically to the task group. And the task group can make a decision about how to apply the scoring rubric as a group, so that that tool is adequately vetted in a public process by the task group prior to the meeting in April, as that was a commitment of the council to use that tool in the implementation of the climate action plan recommendations. So there's that component, which I understand Chase will graciously make that request of the task group. I think that is independent now of the conversation that David is requesting as a counselor. There's a question about where and when the revision to the recommendations should be considered. Sort of acting out on a limb here, my question to you as a steering committee is, the plan has been that the task group's recommendations have been drafted. They will come to the council in April, tentatively, like based on the council's consideration around scheduling in March. And my question to you all is, there any precedents to be set around requesting the task group to consider a counselor's input prior to deliberation at the full council level in April? My gut is that, David, appreciating that you're new to the process, is that when the recommendations go to the council in April, that we also forward your consideration and we just consider as a steering committee how to address a counselor's review and consideration of those recommendations when the council deliberates in April. But expect that the task group's recommendations are where they are and will come up for the council to consider in April. So that's my understanding and impression, but as a counselor who coming to me with a revision to a task group's recommendation, it's felt a little out of my swim lane to figure out how to clarify this process and this is the kind of stuff as we move forward that will need consideration, I think, beyond state staff driving that process. So wanted to use this to consider with all of you, but expect that.
Yeah. That's why I framed, if you will, my ask in terms of the legislative process. It's the process I'm most familiar with, and at any point in the debate until passage of a bill, a motion to send the bill back to committee is in order. And so if I've superimposed the process, I know, I apologize. That said, if it's, as I said in my remarks, there are things that are not in this paper, and I did not add them because I wanted to hold exactly to what had been presented to the committee, just reorganize it so it was better, what I feel is better stated. But I think some things need to be added, and so how within this process could that information become part of that discussion in April about whether or not the Climate Council will adopt that position paper?
Thanks.
And I'm sorry, it's a rhetorical question. I don't mean to put anybody, you, Jane, or anybody on the spot. It's just I want to understand because I represent rural interests. Forest land is a big deal in rural areas. And you start messing around with the economics of forest land, which are tenuous at best, you can have an exaggerated effect on rural areas.
Thanks. Liz, please go ahead.
On your first point regarding the rubric, I'm in total support, and I appreciated Chase's work in the meeting. I did attend the Just Transition Subcommittee meeting and spoke a little bit there in support of the initial efforts that he made. So I think that's all good, at least in my view, as someone who sat on the task group, as well as the cross-sector subcommittee and attended the Just Transitions discussion. So that's all good. On David, on your point, your analogy to legislative process, I don't know if it'll lead us, you and I, to the same conclusion, but my head goes to the council as a whole hasn't yet had a chance to consider the work. And obviously you've taken a very careful look at it. Admittedly, it's a document that was drafted by committee, and the perfection of such a document is tough to achieve, but you probably saw, if you went through the meetings, that literally it was a paragraph by paragraph and at times sentence by sentence task that the group took on, and took a lot to get to the place where there was at least consensus to bring it to the council. So where I go when I hear your commentary and suggestions is to actually bring it to the council. And one of the outcomes, among others, that would be possible at the council level would be for them to listen to input from counselors like yourself. And I'm sure there will be many others that have opinions on the work product, and choose whether to remand it, as it were, or put it back to the task group, or instead take another action, such as bring it to the actual chartered subcommittees to do further work, depending upon what aspect of the work folks want to have looked at. So I would be in favor of keeping to our process, not because we're not going to consider what you're saying, but instead what you're saying should be considered by the whole council. And the outcome that you're suggesting is among the actions the council could then take, both on the rewrite, as it were, as well as on opening up for, kind of further work or scope. I can think of many different outcomes the council could have, but those are certainly two. So that's where I would go.
Yeah, I guess not to beat a dead horse here, but the legislative process, one of the reasons you have committees is so that the full body doesn't have to consider all the witnesses, the studies and whatever. And it's sort of a winnowing process. And I'm prepared to follow this process, but again, I have information that has been generated by my work, just straight old online legwork that is different than what was presented to the committee. And how does that fit into when we talked about that agenda for the 13th? Now, I presume the agenda for the April meeting is going to be every bit as chock-a-block full as the March meeting. And so how is it that we do this? And I'll just pose the question.
Yeah, I will just identify that has been a consistent theme of capacity from the council to have the time and thought to really take action on work that has taken a year to prepare for them and thoughtfully deliberate on. And this is no different than other places, and it'll be attention as well and will require additional time and work. But Chase.
Let me just start by saying, as a non-member of the steering committee, I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to speak now, but if it is, and you all will allow me to, I'm happy to. But if not, I'd be happy to wait until the public comment period.
If it's tied to deliberation of the task group and the work of the task group between now and April, as a member.
Okay, it is. So I thank you, Jane. I appreciate that. David, I guess the one thing I just wanted to say in general response to what I heard you say sort of substantively, which I recognize isn't really what the steering committee is charged with considering now, is the topics that I heard you describe. I believe the task group did hear witnesses on those subjects, such as economic impacts, forestry, health impacts. I believe we did cover those things. The VEIC study that you mentioned was something that was considered on a couple of different occasions in the task group. And so perhaps it's we could have some further discussion at some point, but I believe that although there might be some specific pieces of information you've identified that were not part of the conversation, I do believe that topically the things that you mentioned were, and some of the specific reports that you mentioned were also. So I look forward to learning more about it, but just wanted to at least put that out there, as I think it could be helpful to the conversation, and knowing there might not be as big of a gap there as perhaps some might fear. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Chase. And just to answer Lauren's question in the chat as a steering committee member, there is no planned meeting of the task group between now and April. However, the only sort of pin in that is the task group, based on a process specifically to apply the equity scoring rubric, may choose to convene to have a conversation about that, but it would not be broadly to open up the recommendations. It would be to have a discussion about the equity scoring rubric. So just wanted to say there's no planned meeting. It would just be around that. So understanding that there's a recommendation from Liz to proceed with hearing and forwarding David's rewrite and considerations ahead to the council for the April meeting, if determined that will be the meeting where we discuss the biomass recommendations. that it makes more sense to have those concerns, deliberations heard by the full council, and a process considered about how we go forward based on broad counselor concerns and input or recommendations as a council after we've discussed them, since knowing that we haven't even taken the full recommendations to the council yet. So no request right now for the task group to come together to further iterate on the recommendations, except for that minor component, not minor, except for the component around applying the equity scoring rubric. But further deliberation or concern will be considered based on the whole council's considerations in April. And I have noted just that this conversation for the April meeting will be need thoughtful and plenty of time on the agenda. And we, as a steering committee, as we plan the meeting for April, we can think about how much time is needed for the council to deliberate on those recommendations after they're presented. Any objections to,
No, thank you, Jane.
thanks, David. Thanks, Chase, for supporting that conversation. So those were the two main components of our agenda. So I just want to appreciate and open up the floor for public comment now. And we have time at the end if to further deliberate on public comment after we hear it too. So Annette, your hand went up first, so please.
Yes, this is Annette Smith with Vermonters for a Clean Environment. On the last topic, I do want to agree with Chase that I think that the topics that were mentioned were considered. But I want to speak more to what I hope that the next meeting will focus on, and that is the decision-making process of the council. And I want to assure you that I am attempting to offer constructive input. Because as I've observed many council meetings, I am sort of frustrated by the lack of a clear decision-making process. And I think that it comes from two aspects of how the council was put together. One is that the chair was chosen by the legislature, and then in the middle of the council's work, the Secretary of Administration changed. And the actual role of chairing these meetings has been facilitators. And so, you know, if you've served on a select board, a planning commission, or as a legislator, there is a clear process through which decisions get made. You know, there might be a motion, a second, sometimes there doesn't need to be a second, but there's some way that a decision gets brought up. Now, I don't do well in the abstract, so I'm going to give you a specific example, and I could give you others, but this is one where I think it's a good example. So Chris Campany, representing rural communities, who was on the steering committee and also was on rural resilience, observed more than once that the council should go back to the legislature and seek a change in the mandate in the Global Warming Solutions Act so that it is not just about emissions reductions. And the way the council meetings have run, a comment like that, even though it's been made more than once, and I lost count of how many times Chris said it, but he said it at least 3 times, it just falls flat and it doesn't go anywhere. So it's not like there's a motion on the table, because there are no motions. It's not like there's a chair that picks it up and says, well, we have a suggestion, and shall we have discussion about it and act on it? And so that's been true of council members. It's also been true of comments that the public has brought, is that it's a very odd machine that's been put together here, frankly, from a process perspective. And so I hope that the process discussion that you have at your next meeting will actually grapple with this, because I think it's like where I would start in looking at how you proceed. Because I think that I have described this as a dysfunctional process, and I think that's fair. And I don't think that's accusative accusatory of any individual. It's the way that the legislature set it up. And I would like to see you address it so that you do have a way to make decisions and to follow through on ideas, so that it does function in a more efficient way, and in a way that does respect ideas that come before the council, even from counselors that just don't go anywhere. And so I do hope that you take this as constructive input, and that after your meeting next month, that we see a more defined method for decision-making among the Climate Council. So thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you, Annette. Cheryl Joy, your hand was up, but is down. Would you like to make a comment, or are you all set?
Well, I would like to, but I'd rather first have you all respond to Annette's comments. So I'll wait, and after that issue is finished, I will give my comment. Is that good?
Sure. I'm happy to see if any steering committee members have a response for Annette specifically to the request.
Sure, Jane, I'll speak. I do think process, and that includes every part of the process, is on the agenda. So I appreciate the comment, and I think that is part of the many things we will be diving into next week.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary.
And I was just going to add that the facilitated process that has been referenced in terms of how the work of the council has gone so far is not a process. It's not a decision process. It's when the issue comes out of that facilitation process and stands starkly in front of the members of the council, and they have to cast individual votes. And I believe that's the process that Annette is talking about. And so it's a bifurcated, if you will, process. And that might be something, Kristen, that we take up next month.
Okay, thank you both. And I appreciate that Lauren chimed in the chat also. And I think I agree that everything's on the table for next week when we talk about process. So thanks for clarifying what you would like to see, Annette, and where you've seen challenges in the past. Cheryl Joy now.
Thanks. So I just would like to be the third person that confirms the fact that the issues that were brought up by David Dean were discussed at length in the biomass task group. And as a matter of fact, they were even discussed at length in the Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee meetings prior to the original cap that was put forth. And those and they had recommendations that were very similar to the ones that the biomass task group came up with a year later. And also those documents, I recall seeing those documents as well. The VEIC and the health department, and the health department, the Vermont Health Department did speak as well. I also want to bring up an idea that the equity scoring rubric be used not only on the biomass recommendations, but on other things such as the transportation recommendations that came forth not too long ago. I also, so a really big thing that seems is that we were supposed to discuss, that the VCC was supposed to discuss these recommendations actually at this March meeting. And I'm not sure if it was Julie Moore or Liz Miller, but one of them also really, Liz, you probably, of course, will remember that one of them really encouraged the recommendations to be brought up this March meeting, because it should have been already for many months. It's been put off a really long time. They were supposed to be talked about in November. They were supposed to be talked about in December. And then again in January. I can't remember right now all the different things that have happened to put them off. But when it happens over and over and over again, like 4, 5, 6 months, it starts to not look really very good, you know? The recommendations were supposed to be done already actually last June. And then because of all the talk about scope, which was crazy, it got put off. Even discussions were put off. And then finally they were done by the end of the year. And now you want to change the scope again. I think you need to just not be changing the scope anymore. Just stick with what's going on and then do more. You know, if you want to make more recommendations, such as, like so many have suggested, look at biomass for heat, because many people have suggested looking at that. This brings up an issue, which is that biomass has been recommended against by 2 different groups so far, a year apart from each other. And both times those recommendations have been put down and not used, and they continue to. And 2 legislative sessions now have gone forth with saying that the Vermont Climate Council is in favor of biomass and biofuels, and nobody has been talking about that. And there's not been any in favor, or only there has been recommendation against, but that's been suppressed. But now, both last year and this year, it's been put forth as though in the Clean Heat Standard and now the Affordable Heating Act, it's been put forth as though the VCC is in favor of all this stuff. So that's not right to be happening. I think what's going on is, I just think it's unethical what's going on right now. And it's secretive, and it seems like something different is happening that I'm not prepared to say out loud right now, but I don't think it looks very good. So again, I think you ought to just look at the recommendations and deal with them. So I'll have anybody comment on that. And Liz, who was it, you or Julie Moore?
I don't know. I do think that I spoke maybe on more than one occasion in favor of bringing the biomass task group recommendations to the Climate Council as early as possible, including when there was some vacancies, which I know was an extenuating circumstance. So I agree with you that the recommendations should be brought to the council. And it's one of the reasons that I suggest we follow that process, even knowing that councilors such as David Dean mentioned earlier will have commentary, recommendations, or even objections, and potentially vote against the recommendations. They were still worked on for many months by a group of people who came together to attempt to reach consensus, and I believe they should be brought to the council.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl Joy. Thank you, Liz, for responding. Billy, I see your hand went up.
Thanks. Just a quick clarification as one of the co-chairs of the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We did not issue recommendations on the biomass topic as a subcommittee. I've been consistent about this all throughout. Work was done by our subcommittee on this topic. A working draft of a paper was shared with the council, who then tasked the biomass task group to continue the work, but we did not adopt a consensus recommendation on this topic. So thank you.
Thanks, Billy, for clarifying how we got to this point in the process. So seeing no other hands up, are there any other thoughts or comments on public comment today? Hearing none, I know the edits and revisions that I will be making to the outcomes document, the one pager and the agenda. I'll clarify with the counselors' expectations around food and the time of the meeting, that it just got another half an hour longer. And we'll work to get those documents out this afternoon. And hearing no objections or other comments, we'll just look forward to seeing everybody next week in person in Berlin. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.